Hey everybody, thanks for joining me today on the Pound for Pound Leader Podcast. I am excited for the release of my latest book, That Doesn't Just Happen, How Excellence Accelerates Everything, is being released at the end of August. But you can go to my website at mikekai.tv, that's mikekai.tv, to pre-order your copy. I'm really excited about this book because this book is about excellence, about doing the best with what you have. You might be running a business, you might be leading a team, you might be trying to get that holy hustle and trying to move forward in life. Whatever you are doing, the service industry, military, you name it, excellence accelerates everything. And I use the example in 1 Kings chapter 10 in the Bible that talks about the Queen of Sheba's conversation and observations that she has when she meets up with King Solomon. It's powerful, and I think it might be my best book to date. I should get better, right? So go ahead, mikekai.tv, and go get that. You know, I'm really excited because two of our staff members here at Inspire, DJ and Josh, got an opportunity to interview one of my great friends, Pastor Jeff Osborne. But Jeff's more than a pastor. You know, he's a pastorpreneur. He does a whole lot of different things. He's got sauce when he speaks. You know, he's got all that style, and he's amazing. But more importantly than that, he's a family man and a godly man. You know, Jeff coaches Fortune 500 companies, sports teams. He's a life transformational coach as well as a minister, but he's just an all-around great wealth of knowledge. He has incredible insight and wisdom, and there are things that he's gonna say that are gonna stick with you. You're gonna wanna write it down while you're driving or no matter what you're doing right now. Be careful because he's about to blow your mind. On the Pound for Pound Leader Podcast, listen to my friend, Jeff Osborne.
Hey everybody, welcome to Mike Kai's Pound for Pound Leader Podcast. My name is DJ Garces. I am the podcast director as well as on staff here at Inspire Church. And we're bringing to you an interview today, a discussion today with an incredible man of God, incredible businessman, entrepreneur, author, and speaker. And he's going to be joining us. But we also have with us our Inspire Global Director, Josh Adoy-Lonsad. Welcome, Josh. Thanks for being with us here to help just talk with our guest today. Jeff Osborne is an incredible man. He's been spending some time with our staff here at Inspire and just speaking wisdom and just helping us out. And he is an entrepreneur. He is a pastor. He is an author. He has spoken to presidents. He's spoken to Fortune 500 companies. He's a transformational coach. He's spoken to churches, of course. He's speaking to government officials. He's been all over the place, helping people get to the next level. And we're glad to have him here. Welcome, Jeff. Thanks for joining us.
Hey, thanks for having me, DJ. Appreciate you guys.
Right on. We just, one of the things that we always wanted to just kind of have people share when they're on the podcast is just kind of, maybe people don't know where you've come from, and just maybe briefly, I know you've shared in the past how you were facing like a jail sentence before, 16 years, it sounded like, and then now you're here speaking to like presidents. How did you, if you could briefly share, how do you go from that to where you are now?
Man, I'll tell you what, I mean, just even the intro had me like, man, I want to meet this guy. Who is this? So I'm like, you like, man? No, man, I'm honored to be able to be here. I love Mike and love you guys. And so it's an honor to be able to be here. Yeah, was a top ranked wide receiver, was slated to go to the NFL, ended up hanging out with the wrong people because I lost sight of my identity. And it led me to being a getaway driver and with some people around us. And we ended up getting arrested for 6 armed robberies and a possible attempted murder. And the attempted murder ended up getting dropped. But nevertheless, at 18 years old, even though I wasn't the person who got out, they all put it on me because I was the oldest. And so I was sentenced to 16 years to life in Chino State Prison. And through that moment, I had a decision to make. And I just decided to empower myself in a place that was kind of like a cesspool for just negativity. I decided that I was going to grow and just become infectious and just shed just some love and shed that light and be able to grow. And so that really started my whole growth. Any book that I could get, I inhaled it. And I just believed, even in the Bible, was just like, God has the ability to open doors and to do things like that. And so I held on to that. And through that process, 11 and a half months into my sentence, from the largest race riots that happened in LA and Los Angeles to what was happening in the prison system, to surviving all of that, 11 and a half months in, they said, hey, Mr. Osborne, roll it up. I said, where am I going? I went back to court. And the judge says, hey, upon reviewing your letter. And I said, what letter? And they said, you got a letter from the assistant warden of Chino State Prison. I never saw him, never met him, never shook his hand. And they said this was a good young man who hit a bump in the road, let him go. And so when I should have served 16 years to life, I served 11 and a half months out of that, and miraculously got set free. And so I just made a decision that I would never allow another person to go through that lack of identity that will cause them to go down a path that they weren't created to go down. And little did I know that it would cause me to really have to question some things inside of me. And when I hit moments where I felt like I couldn't do it, even surviving an attempted suicide because nobody would hire me. McDonald's wouldn't hire me. Your brother couldn't even scrub toilets. And so I had no choice but to go into entrepreneurship and to start something. And so it started my journey of learning, growing, to become a man that although I had no platform, I had a drive and I knew I had a purpose, and I had to do my due diligence and then, let God kind of open those doors, and then the rest is history.
Wow. That is amazing. That's incredible. And I mean, just hearing that and just hearing the things that, I mean, it's unbelievable how God has worked through your life and just how he's continued to do that. And just the things that you've learned, because what you've been sharing with our staff has just been so powerful. And there's no doubt that God is on your life and that you're able to, he's using you to really pour into companies and churches. And I love the fact that we have Josh here because he's got a background as an entrepreneur as well. And we would just love to just pick your brain on just things of leadership and business and maybe even some ministry things. That's more my background, but we just love to hear what you have to say on some things. Josh, you have something you want to share?
Thanks for being here, Jeff. It's amazing. You talked about the environment. You talked about some of the people you were running with and that you were, the driver. And it just, to see where you were and where you are now, how big of a role did mentorship and the people that you surround yourself, how big was that for you to getting to where you're at now?
Brother, I will tell you, man, that your surrounding, your mentorship, who's around you in your circle is so much, it plays everything in. And the reason why I say that is because right after I had attempted suicide, I took my car, I was married, had my son who was probably 1, he had a fever. I had no money for fever medication. I was using t-shirts for diapers. I had to drive to go tell my landlord, even though they blessed us, where the rent was $3,100 a month in Chino Hills, they were allowing us to stay there for $800 a month. And I hit this moment where I couldn't even afford that. My wife was permanently disabled and I still couldn't even afford, even when I was getting that help and I was driving. And I just felt like, you might as well kill yourself. Death would be a relief compared to the hell you're going through. And I took my car and jumped that pole. And in that moment, as God preserved my life, the next day, one of my best friends to this day, his name is Andre Walton, and successful businessman, multi-millions of dollars. I went to this men's breakfast with my dad one day at an IHOP and or Coco's. It was called Coco's. I don't know if y'all had those out here in Hawaii, but Coco's, man, was kind of like an IHOP, a little more bougier than like a Denny's. You know what I'm saying? Like one of those. And so my dad was like, man, why don't you come? I was like, nah, I'm good. I don't want nothing to do with God. I'm angry. I'm frustrated. And I went, met this guy named Andre, who was a sponsored skateboarder. He was a successful business person. The next day, so I attempted suicide. The next day, I get this phone call from him. And he goes, hey, Jeff, this is Andre. And I was like, first I was like, how'd you get my number? And, because when you owe some bills, you know what I'm saying? You see some weird numbers, you kind of call screen a little bit. And he called me and he says, hey, I just want to let you know that you and I are cut from the same cloth. And here I was feeling like I was less than. I couldn't take care of my family. I had this goal and this dream inside of me, but my surroundings and my background didn't match that goal that was inside of me, that dream. And this man said something to me that changed my life, because as he said it, my first thought was, what does he see that I don't see? What does he recognize in me that I don't recognize in myself? It was in that moment that God was like, Jeff, the greatest gold mines aren't in the deserts of the Middle East and not in the jungles of South America or Indonesia. He said the greatest gold mines lie inside of the barista that you see every day. It's inside of the cashier that checks you out. It's in the person that's walking past. And he says the problem is the gold is inside of them, but they don't know how to dig it out.
Wow.
And in that moment, I just made a decision to God. I said, God, then I'm going to become a gold digger. I'm going to find the gold inside of people and start pulling it out. And so from Andre Walton to a gentleman named Rick Gutman, who was another multimillionaire who I met at a gym, who introduced me to Frank and Cindy Soshnick. Frank didn't graduate sixth grade, but runs 31 multi-million-dollar companies. He is out of Florida and he laughs about it. And I'm as California West Coast as you can. And, you know, you have the two of us, but this dynamic of him finding something inside of me and making a decision over the last 12 years to help mentor me in business, to understand what that looks like, for me to leave my mentality of what I thought, to walk into a world where oftentimes I felt disqualified for being at the table, to then leading me to Pastor Obed Martinez, who has a reach that's like unreal, right? And which is why I met Mike and everybody else out there. But during this whole process, I guess what allowed me to become what I am was taking on this mentality of sonship. And when I say sonship, it doesn't just mean like in the church realm. It's literally me saying, listen, I'm going to take everything that I know, put it on the shelf for a moment, and just learn and glean everything I can from these individuals. Because what took them 20 years, what took them 30 years, if I can just listen, if I can just be in the room, I don't even have to talk. If I can just humble myself and allow my pride to go out the window, then I can learn things that took them 30, 40, 15 years to learn. And I can learn this in a matter of a year or 6 months. And so it really taught me the power behind being in environments that match my calling and not allowing my calling to be determined by the environment that I'm in.
Wow. Wow. That's awesome. So that's amazing. You know, you talk about, you know, mining that gold, and you said some of your mentors talked about that. And, you know, where you're at now, you're an amazing coach, right? Yeah. And so you must see the gold, right? You are that gold finder, that gold digger, where you see someone. Yeah. What are some practical steps that you would advise people? Hey, how do you mine your own gold, or what does that process look like?
Man, I love it, because when I talk about being a transformational coach, what I'm specifically is I'm an identity coach. Ooh. And when I talk about being an identity coach, we fail to realize that the person that we are, if we're not careful, oftentimes we'll start building a life based upon insecurities and people pleasing rather than being genuinely who we are created to be. And what I mean by that is you can be a high capacity leader and still struggle with people pleasing or the disease to please. And so the first thing that I talk about is I couldn't, like, here I was speaking in front of, you know, I was pastoring a church. I was traveling the world. My pastor, Pastor Obed Martinez, calls himself a pastorpreneur, right? He's a pastor that has a heart for entrepreneurs. And so for so many years, I tried to make myself that mold. I tried to fit into that mold, knowing that from 10 years, I came from corporate speaking, Fortune 500s, you know, coaching athletes, professional sports teams. And then people were like, hey, you know what? You should be a pastor. You love to preach. You kind of love the word of God. That's what you need to be. And because I didn't know what God was calling me to be, I found myself trying to fit into a mold that I wasn't created to fit into. And what really held me there was that I had a disease to please, where I could not say no and I could not set boundaries, because I felt that if I stayed in my newness, somehow it was going to hurt my relationships. And so over the last 20 years, it didn't hit me until probably, you guys, like 2 years ago, that I was like, man, you could be a high capacity leader and still struggle with the disease to please. Still struggle with you saying, this is not my sweet spot, but I could better resource my company. I could better resource my employees. I could better resource my vision and my dream if I am true and authentic to what God has created me to be. And the reason why I say what is because everybody's like, find out who you're called to be, who you're called to be. And I tell people, who you are never changes. You're always going to be Josh. You're always going to be DJ. I'm always going to be Jeff Osborne. The who we are never changes, but what we are changes. And oftentimes what we become is a result of what everybody else has said that we're supposed to be. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And so now my success is not driven from a place of personal vision or personal desire, it's driven from a place of people pleasing. So now I'm hitting this goal in my life. I'm trying to hit these numbers. I'm trying to build this company because I'm trying to prove to my father, I'm trying to prove to my mother, I'm trying to prove to my ex-employer that I'm worth it. So now you're not living your life or building your team from a place of vision. You're building it from a place of people pleasing. And I think that if we can begin to identify what we've been called to be in life, it's your what. In other words, I tell people your do flows from your who. What you do in life flows from who you've decided to be for other people. And so when it comes to business, when I can decide what is the desired outcome that I want to provide for people, that will determine what I do and how I move. And so if we get more addicted to the desired outcome that we want to see for people, the desired outcome that we want to have when they think about our business or our company, then that will determine the moves I make, and that will determine how I move in my organization and my company, and most importantly, how I build my future.
So Jeff, like you just sharing that, we come across so many young leaders, potential leaders, and I think a lot of them they struggle with that. They're struggling with making an image for themselves. How can they please people? How can they become people that people are expecting them to be? So how do you begin to help? How do you begin to help these young leaders, or even whether young or old, it doesn't matter. I think everyone deals with it. But how do you help them walk through this, where their mindset changes? Is it something that it's a realization? What are some things that we can do to help them kind of gain those victories?
Man, I love that question, DJ. One of the first things that I tell people, it's time for us. The first thing that we fail to do is to interrogate our current reality. And when I talk about interrogating our current reality, you got to get real and honest with yourself and ask yourself, am I building a life by design, or am I building a life by default? Am I designing the life that I want to live because this is what is in me? Or am I just doing it by default? In other words, this is just what they said I should be, and this is what I have to go with. Because if you can get honest with yourself and ask, man, am I loving my life? I found myself like, man, you should be happy, Jeff. At least you're not where you used to be. Most people don't get to have this life that you have right now. So you should just settle and be okay with living that life. People tell you that the life that you want to live is you living in la la land. It's not reality, right? And so oftentimes we allow somebody else's reality, or what they say is realistic, to become our viewpoints. And so until I interrogate my current reality and ask myself, am I designing a life, or am I living my life by default? That's number one. Number two, it's not asking who am I, it's asking who am I not. You'll find out more of who you are by discovering who you're not. And most of us, we feel so insecure when we say, I'm not that type of leader, or I'm not that type of person. I don't learn that way. That's not something that is really causing me to really tick and drive, but this is where my sweet spot is. We will be most effective when we understand our sweet spot in life. And how you determine your sweet spot is that your sweet spot will replenish you. It won't deplete you. And so if I'm doing something that is in my sweet spot, I'll feel replenished. This is why you can put me in front of 1 million people and I will talk all day long. I will coach all day long. I mean, I've been running like a machine, because this is what drives me. I'm addicted to the outcome of having people create a life that is loud, large, and loved by eliminating the disease to please and overcoming ungodly beliefs or limiting beliefs that stop them from getting to where they are. So the first thing you got to do is you got to interrogate your current reality. You got to get real with yourself and say, am I living a life by design or default? The second thing that you got to be able to do is, once you identify that, you got to discover, who am I not? Am I taking on a life that somebody else has placed on me? So it's getting real and saying, that's not my sweet spot. And the third thing is I tell people, we live in a world where everybody's like, do what you love, do what you're passionate about. If you do what you love, then, life is going to be so amazing. And that's so much baloney. Like, I love skateboarding. I love food, but a brother ain't going to go open up and start chefing just because I love food. and I'm passionate about food. Like I'm a foodie, like I'm a passionate vegan foodie. I know some people think it's an oxymoron, but I am passionate about that. But I'm not going to go start something because I'm passionate and that I love it. I'm going to do something that I'm addicted to the outcome or the contribution that I'm going to make. Why is that important? Because if I discover the value that I want to bring to this world, even though when I have to do something, it's not something that I'm happy about doing or not personally passionate about in that moment, I'm going to do it anyway because I'm more addicted to the outcome than I am to the initial job. There are moments where I may be tired and I may not want to coach or may not want to speak. However, I'm so addicted to the value and the outcome that I'll do what I don't love to get the outcome. And so I help them be able to identify those areas in their life so that they can be open, honest, and real with themselves. I'll say this. I tell people the awareness of is the freedom from. And so the moment that I can become aware of my people pleasing tendencies, the moment I can be aware of me understanding, okay, am I trying to force myself into somebody else's lifestyle or somebody else's view because it just looks attractive? Am I aware that that is not what my sweet spot is? Because just because I can do it doesn't mean I'm called to it.
That's good.
And sometimes we don't know the difference between that. So when you find that sweet spot and we start coaching in that, of getting down to the crux of what are your beliefs that you have of yourself? What is the story that you're telling yourself of what you should have and where you should be in your life? And once we start interrogating their current reality, all of those mindsets begin to crumble. So what's left is the shell of what they are truly called to be.
Just because you can do it doesn't mean you're called to it. Underlined. Right. It's underlined, man. I got a question. Let's just say you're listening to this podcast and you go, man, Jeff, that's me. I'm people pleasing. I found myself like I just went into reality and I just interrogated everything. And you're right. Like, what am I doing? Like, why am I being this person that I'm just not called to be? What's your first step? Like, what do you? Okay, hey, this is reality. Now, what do you do? What would you advise that person?
The source of people pleasing is because and I hope this comes across right, regardless of whether. When I people please, it's because I've made man my source instead of God my source. Mm-hmm. When I people please, it's because I made that person the source of my joy, the source of my provision, the source of my outcome, the source of my happiness. That's why we people please. And let me give you a prime example. When we're young and we're sitting there, we're young and you're a kid and you're in the doctor's office, you want to play, you want to move, you're hiding, you're climbing under chairs. And as a parent, and I'm guilty of doing this, we say, okay, listen, if you just sit down and you relax, after we're done, I'll give you this cookie. If you relax after you're done, we'll go get some ice cream. Or if you're out here and you're from Hawaii, if you chill, we're going to go get some shaved ice, right? That's from the Lord right there. And so what ends up happening is we get programmed as we're younger that if somebody has something that we desire, if we become whatever they want us to be, then we can get what they have for us.
Wow.
And the challenge is when we get older, we never grow out of this mindset. And so if a job or a boss or a relationship or a person or an industry has, and they dangle that carrot in front of our face that says, okay, if you want this, then you got to be this, then we will compromise and become something that we were never created to be because we believe that they are the only source that can provide it for us. And so the greatest thing that I had to learn in my life, there's a book that's entitled, What You Think of Me Is None of My Business. And it was one of the weirdest moments. It was a God moment for me. I'm sitting down, it's 4:00 in the morning. And I feel like go to the garage. The book's going to look like this, pick it up. I just saw this image. I go to the garage, go to my box of books, pick it up, and there's the book. It was written like in the 80s. So I normally just read it from the beginning, but I just flip it over. And as I flip it, it goes to chapter 4 that says, God is your source. Now, mind you, this person's not even like a Christian, but the book was entitled, like this chapter was like, God is your source.
Wow.
And so what she began to say is that when you know that God is your source, that means that you understand that man becomes a resource. In other words, man can only give you and resource what God has already sourced them with.
Wow.
So if I know that I'm in alignment with what God has called me to be, then that means that he is the one who's going to provide for me, and that anybody who comes in my life will be a resource for the vision that God has sourced me with. And when you know that, then that means that you know that I can be authentically who I am as a leader, as an entrepreneur, as a high-level executive, because man never determines how far I go or what I can have when I know that God is my source. And so when we people please, we make all of these other people the source of our joy and our happiness, rather than understanding that we are responsible for our joy and our happiness, and that we are also responsible for deciding that enough is enough. And so the first thing that I do with them is I start identifying who did they make a source in their life to determine how far they can go.
Wow.
What was the limiting factor? What was the word that somebody said? What was the conversation that somebody said about your industry, about your business, about your company, about your leadership, that you place them on a throne to determine how far you can go in your life? Because until we begin to dethrone those people in those conversations, you will always seek to please those individuals and make them responsible for the joy that you get to have or how far you get to go in your life. So you got to identify that. Who have you placed on the throne of your life, on your future, that you've made your source, instead of understanding that they are a resource? Whoever comes in your life, they're just resourcing what God has already sourced them for your vision, for your purpose.
So great.
It changes how you move. You know,
Yeah.
it changes how you operate. It changes whether or not you're afraid to be who you are. And that's why I say I love that Proverbs in the Bible that says your giftings make room for you and bring you in front of great men or great people. And oftentimes we are not in our sweet spot, and we're not in front of great men, great opportunities, because we're not us. And when it says you, it's not who you are pretending to be. It's the authentic you. Because there's nothing worse than being successful at being the wrong person.
Mm.
And that's why they say that when you live a life and you don't understand your identity, it's like spending your whole life climbing a mountain only to get to the top and realize that you climbed the wrong one. And so are we trying to climb a mountain? Are we trying to become successful because society says this is who we should be? My island says this is who I should be. My background says this is who I should be. As an ex-gang member, as an ex-drug dealer, as an ex-felon, as somebody who got kicked out of seminary, y'all, like I got kicked out of Bible college, right? My background, being physically abused, everything, should not equate to where I am in life. But if I waited for everybody else to tell me how far I can go in my life based on the color of my skin, based off of you acknowledging, if I played that victim, I would never get to where I'm called to be. So the moment that I am aware of my people-pleasing tendencies or my false identity, now it's my responsibility to change it and say no more. I'm drawing the boundary. I'm rechanging my company. I'm rechanging the structure of how I have things structured. Because just because it worked for somebody else doesn't mean it's going to work for you the same way. LeBron James said it this way. He said, just because someone was one way doesn't mean your outcome has to be the same way. So you can't allow somebody to say, I've been in this industry for 20 years and, you're going to have to do the X, Y, and Z to be able to get there. But if God says, no, I want to bless you in a month, then who am I to tell God how fast he can move in my life? The quicker we are at being our authentic self, the quicker God can bring us in front of all of our opportunities and our blessings.
So people get to this point where they're realizing, okay, I'm discovering who I am. And then you realize there's some pretty big decisions you need to make in your life now, some shifts, some changes, or, how do you encourage people in terms of like now there's a risk because they're used to doing something the whole time. Now there's a risk they got to take to like, I'm going to step over, but I don't know what to expect here. How do you encourage people in their faith or just taking that risk to, hey, we know from hindsight, oh yeah, it worked out. But when you're in the moment, you got to make that decision. How do you encourage people in that?
Man, I love that. I wrote a book that I released last year called Buy the Dang Coffee. And the title of the book came from every day I would buy Nadia, my wife, chocolate croissant and a grande iced soy chai with an extra pump of chai from Starbucks every day. And when you're getting ready to make a faith move or you're struggling or you're trying to do something, the first thing that people tell you is you got to cut back. If you're trying to financially get ahead, they tell you to cut back. And I started listening to all these gurus and I cut back so much, like your boy was depressed. Like I cut back cable, I cut back pleasure, I cut back clothes. Like I was the type of guy who used my son's Xbox because it had Wi-Fi and I set it up to the farthest window to the right of me so I can use my neighbor's Wi-Fi, right? And so when it would disconnect, I'd go over to him and say, hey man, my Wi-Fi ain't working. Can you reset your box to see if, like, I was that type of guy. Like, we had one couch. We had one couch in our house. We had one table that was a Fisher-Price table with the Fisher-Price chairs for my son and my daughter. We only had one heater because we had no heater in our house. So when it was 40 degrees in our house, we all would have to be around this little plug-in heater to take turns. And in my head, I'm like, oh, well, I'm conserving. This is how I get to financial freedom. You cut back. Finally, I'm sitting down and God's like, hey, I want you to go to Starbucks and go buy the grande iced soy chai with an extra pump of chai and a chocolate croissant. I was like, God, that's $7.47. Like, I ain't doing it right now. God, he says, I want you to go buy the coffee. I'm like, no, God, I'm not doing that. I got to be responsible. So finally, God was like, I want you to do it. And I was like, fine, I'm going to go buy the dang coffee. Like I was that angry. So I get in the car, I drive down to the Starbucks. When I walk in, I hear, oh my gosh, Jeff, how you doing? It's so great to see you. And I'm looking around like, me? So I go up to the front and it said, do you want the usual? The grande ice soy chai with extra pump of chai and chocolate croissant not warmed up. I said, absolutely. That'll be $7.47. So I give it to him, shaking my hand like I'm bugging. And the moment I give it to him, she pays. She goes, okay, it'll be just a little bit. I said, great. And something happened in that transition. When I had that transition in that moment, I had given her something that was a faith move. And in return, everybody behind the counter started working to make it a reality. And then as I started looking around, I started noticing that people were living, people were moving. People were thriving. People were buying the dang coffee. And God spoke so loudly to me in that moment. He says, if you never take a step of faith, then you'll never understand how great my provision can be for you. And when I wrote that cup of coffee represents different things for different people. Buying the dang coffee could be the house that God is telling you to step out in faith. It could be going for that promotion that you're trying to go for. It could be starting that second location for your company. You could be starting your company that God has placed in you. If we never give God a reason to be able to bless us massively by stepping out in massive faith, then we will never have what we want to have in our life. And so what is that thing? What is that cup of coffee that God is saying that if you will just step out in faith, then give me a reason to bless you. In other words, I tell people that money and provision is a tool. And what happens is oftentimes we say we want the money, which is a tool, but we have no projects that are tied to the money that we're asking for or the tool. In other words, why do you want God to bless you in your company? What is the desired outcome that you have from you being able to provide that service for people around you? What is the reason? Are you going to point it back to God? If you have a company to do excellence, are you trying to hire people who were like a Jeff Osborne, who was overlooked and you're giving them a second chance? Are you trying to give somebody an opportunity to be able to grow in their life? What is the reason why you want it? Are you giving God a reason to bless you massively? And so when it comes to doing that, I tell people, all in all, like you said, Josh, and even DJ, looking at this, I tell people that faith is not a bungee jump, it's a free fall. And oftentimes what happens is when God gives us a plan, when you have a purpose or a dream, they tell you, well, what's your plan B? Because if your plan A doesn't work out, you got to have a plan B. But that contradicts what it means, because I tell people, if I got a dream and this is what it's in my heart, I'm going to jump. And I'm not going to tie a plan B to me, because a plan B ends up becoming a bungee jump, which means I may be free falling. And before I give God the opportunity to bless me, the bungee cord to the plan B pulls me back. But if I can understand that faith is a free fall, then that means that I've got enough faith to believe that as I'm falling, that God will allow the current to hit me to where his favor and his blessing will carry me to heights that I would never be able to get to. And you can't get that if you're unwilling to free fall. And so I would rather shoot for the moon for this massive dream. Or I'll put it this way, I would rather have 50% of a massive dream than 100% of a small one. And so what is that thing that is causing you, that's going to push you out of your comfort zone to believe God for something bigger than where you are? What is that thing that's going to cause you to say, man, I got to buy the dang coffee? Because when I bought the coffee, guys, here's the thing. I made a decision that the feeling that God says is my resource never runs out. When you look at the Bible in 2 Kings, of the widow with the oil, it says when Elijah came, he says, hey, I want you to bake me a cake. She's like, what are you talking about? Like, this oil that I have is just enough. And then me and my sons, we're going to die. The other thing was, she said, I got so much of a debt that these creditors are going to come and they're going to take my sons and they're going to make them slaves. But you're going to ask, I just told you I don't have a lot. And you're going to ask me to bake you something with what I have, right? And so she does it and bakes it. The last one, that's that buying the dang coffee. Elisha says to her, now go bring me all of the vessels that you have, that you can find, and pour the oil. So as she's finding, the sons are getting the vessels, she's pouring the oil, and the oil is just flowing. I'm talking, guys, it's flowing like the ancient rivers of Babylon. It's pouring, right? And then all of a sudden it says, where's another vessel? And they say, there are no more. And the text in the Bible says, and then the oil stopped. And what that spoke to me is that it's never an issue of the vessels, or it's never the issue of the oil. It's never an issue of whether or not God has enough resource. It's that there is just a lack of vessels. In other words, if I allow myself to become a vessel of faith that steps out and gets outrageous and gets bold with my request, and I buy the dang coffee, that means I give God a reason to activate his blessing over my life. So what is that area in your life that you get to operate in that causes you to bring another vessel before God, bring another a moment of faith, bring a bigger thing, and that's what I love about Mike, is that with all of the different endeavors that he's in, and all of the different companies, and the Inspire and the Avail and Inspire Collective, and not only Inspire Church, you're always pushing the envelope and giving God a reason to be able to do it. And so in that process, it's opened up my coaching practice. It's opened up the tech company that I launched 2 years ago myself, and Obed and my pastor on an inspirational streaming network. We're taking on heads of Silicon Valley, and we're at the table with these guns. And it was like, well, God, if I'm available, then you can use me. And because of us choosing to buy the dang coffee every day, we've given him a reason to provide. And so when I did that day, he gave me the provision to buy that coffee every single day, and all the way up to this time, it hasn't stopped. And so that's why I wrote the book, That One Sip is Worth the Risk. At the end of the day, when everything happens, that one sip of success, that one sip when you get the keys to your house, that one sip when you bought that dress, girl, that you knew you were supposed to get, or fellas, when you bought them sneakers, you know what I'm saying? And you bless yourself when you bought that car, that sip of that moment of success is the addiction that keeps you pushing for the next level of what can God do next in my life.
So good. This has been amazing, Jeff. And man, we've been hearing from you from the weekend through our staff, just training. And I'm telling you, we've got so much from you. And we just appreciate everything you've done just to pour into us and even into this podcast today. And, you spoke about that book, Buy the Damn Coffee. How can people buy that, or what other resources you have? How can they find out more about you?
Yeah. You can head to jefftosborne.com. That's JEFF, T as in Tom, OSBORNE, jefftosborne.com. Not only do I have Buy the Dang Coffee on there, but I did a master class. So not only did I break down the book, or you have the book, but what I did is I took all 7 chapters and I did a master class breaking down the principles of how to apply every single chapter to your life. I gave the crux, the inside scoop of it, and you'll have access to that, and you can kind of go and hit that resource. But I also have God Morning, which is a devotional. And that's my saying. I always say, God morning, God morning. And so when you start your day off with a God morning, you'll have a God day. And so I gave declarations, 31-day prayer and declaration. In other words, it's giving you the ability to speak life over yourself and get out of your limited mindset into the impossibilities that God has, or the possibilities of you doing the impossible, right? Of you doing things that nobody has. So these are words that I said over myself. These are declarations that I spoke over myself. And it's really the power of learning how to speak life. And then on there, I have the opportunity to coach and to be able to do that. So all of it's on there, jefftosborne.com. And then if they want to reach out to me, all my social media handles are also that jefftosborne.com. And I'm always putting the things, marriage quotes, identity quotes, all that, Instagram, Twitter, jefftosborne.com or Jeff T. Osborne.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, just encourage everyone to check him out on Instagram, on his website, social media, and grab that book and be super encouraged. I know I'm going to check that out. Well, thank you, Jeff. Thanks for joining us on this podcast, and can't wait to see you again when you're back in Hawaii. So God bless you, and again, thanks for sticking around with us.
Appreciate y'all. Mahalo.
Hey everyone, if you are in the entertainment field, if you're a business person, a civic servant, a community leader, an educator, maybe you're in the medical field, whatever industry that you are in, I want to encourage you to become a member of the Inspire Collective. It was established by Mike Kai, Dr. Sam Chan, and Martijn van Tilburg to help raise up disciples who are kingdom focused Monday through Saturday and not just on Sundays. And so while many churches are effective in equipping people for ministry within their walls, some struggle to prepare them for their workplace, their neighborhood, and their social community. The Inspire Collective delivers a unique blend of inspiration, application, spiritual, and practical for those wanting to impact and influence their everyday world for Christ. So if that's you and you want access to resources, if you want to be able to network with other like-minded individuals in the Inspire Collective to make that impact, then make sure you join the Inspire Collective. You can find out more information and sign up for membership at inspirecollective.com.
Hey everybody, thank you for joining us. Now don't forget to hit subscribe to receive the latest episodes. And I would love for you to follow me on Instagram at Mike Kai and let me know what you got out of this week's podcast. I'll see you next week where we're helping to take your leadership from one peak to the next. Aloha.